New York Congressman Jamaal Bowman is the latest member of Congress to be censured by the House following an incident where he may have intentionally pulled a fire alarm in order to delay a vote during the debt ceiling fight. Here's the vote as it happened yesterday.
On this vote, the yeas are 214, the nays are 191. The resolution is, with 5 present, the resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Other congressional Democrats were quick to criticize the move, the squad member Ayanna Pressley calling it just the latest act in Congress's racist history. Let's watch.
This censure is just the latest in this chamber's racist history of telling black men that they don't belong in Congress. To the black men of this nation, know that you belong everywhere. Jamaal Bowman is
time has expired.
And a few months after losing his speaker's gavel, Congressman Kevin McCarthy announced he would be resigning his position and planned to leave Congress at the end of the year. Here to discuss all this is Mychael Schnell, congressional reporter here at the Hill. Michael, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
The House is never dry when it comes to drama. There is always something crazy going on. I'm wondering, one of the things that's come up with both Kevin McCarthy announcing that he's leaving Congress, and you also have Patrick McHenry announcing that he's on his way out. What does this do to Republicans' majority, and how does this math work out, and what is it going to look like come 2024?
Yeah, so the McHenry announcement doesn't have to do anything, excuse me, with the majority right now, because he's just not running for a re-election at the end of next year. But the McCarthy one is significant. So take this back a few steps. Last week, we saw the expulsion of Congressman George Santos. That narrowed the GOP's slim majority a little bit. But this week with the announcement of Kevin McCarthy, who's going to be resigning at the end of the year, that narrows that majority even more. So look, Spencer, going into this Congress, we knew it was going to be a very razor-thin majority for House Republicans. That just keeps getting smaller and smaller. And I'll tell you what, it could get smaller in the months to come. Congressman Bill Johnson has said that he is leaving the House by mid-March to take a job as the president of Youngstown University. There are also someone like Congressman Higgins, a Democrat, who's resigning in February. So those will probably even each other out. But then we have that special election for George Santos in February. I believe the date for that is in mid-February. So there's a lot going on right now, a lot of juggling with the House GOP's majority, what the numbers will be in the chamber. But the main message there and the thesis there is that the House Republicans' small majority keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
Do you think there's a chance they end up botching math somehow and they just can't do anything? Or do you think, how at risk are they of losing the majority outright?
Well, are you talking about right now or in
next 2024? Like, before the election happens. Right. If somebody let's say there's another scandal, let's say somebody has a health condition, God forbid, it would be as easy as losing, 1 or 2 more members, right?
Oh, yeah. We are in very close territory to that evenly split House chamber. Right now, I think that, on any party line vote with all members voting, Republicans can only afford to lose 3 votes as things stand right now. I mean, look, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene put this really well in a post on X right after Kevin McCarthy announced he was resigning. She succinctly said, I hope nobody dies. Because if somebody dies, obviously an unexpected event, that would just narrow this majority even more. So it just shows, how sensitive and how small this House Republican majority is. And look, it's likely going to be an issue in the coming months. We've seen all year, even when Republicans had their initial thin majority, that they had difficulty passing a cadre of bills. Let it be the debt limit, let it be government funding, let it be any of these appropriations bills we're seeing right now. We've seen them be pulled from the floor left and right. That's only going to get more difficult as this majority gets smaller. Speaker Johnson has his work cut out for him.
I'm going to join in on the fun here. It was a strange move in my eyes to see Kevin McCarthy say he's retiring at the end of the year. Very interesting move the first week of December. He basically gave us his 2 weeks. What do you make of him deciding to retire? Was this something you saw coming or closer to the House than we are?
I actually did see this coming. It didn't come as too much of a surprise because, look, if we just look at this whole year of Kevin McCarthy's tenure in the House, right? It started in January. He made history with that protracted speaker's race. It took him 15 rounds to finally get the gavel. And then after that, he saw difficulty after difficulty with passing bills in his House with this rabble-rousing conservative wing of the party. The right flank was consistently pushing him further right and further right, squeezing him on a number of matters. And Kevin McCarthy had his work cut out for him. And he had to wrangle this conference. It was not an easy task. And then fast forward to September when we saw his decision to put in this clean continuing resolution on the floor to avert a government shutdown. That was essentially the last straw for a number of these hardline conservatives. Days later, Matt Gaetz led the charge to oust him from office. 8 Republicans oust him from the speakership. 8 Republicans joining with all Democrats to depose him from his position in a really stunning and, quite frankly, embarrassing manner. After that, Kevin McCarthy really never found his place in the Republican conference. There wasn't exactly a spot for him in leadership. It didn't seem like he enjoyed being a rank-and-file member, so he ultimately came to this decision to tap out early. So all that being said, with this tumultuous up and down year he's had, I don't know if I was too surprised by the announcement.
And I think one question that a lot of people on both sides, I think, have had, both with the expelling of George Santos and then the censorship of Congressman Bowman, what kind of precedent does this set going forward? Obviously, like we've been talking about, things on Capitol Hill, specifically in the House, have always been a bit more frayed. And anytime there's sort of a punishment taken, whether it's the impeachments of President Trump or someone else, they say, okay, well, this precedent now has changed. Now we're going to be impeaching people for anything. Do you think that Republicans are going to engage in sort of a tit for tat when it comes to, obviously they censured Bowman, but they didn't expel him. Do you think that this whole last couple of months has sort of lowered the threshold for what it takes for members of the House to try to push something like this?
I mean, this is definitely the Congress of members policing each other, right? I mean, just this year, last week, we saw that expulsion of George Santos. And then this year, we've seen already 3 censures of lawmakers. First, it started with Adam Schiff, then Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, now Congressman Bowman. In history, only 27 members of the House have been censured. That's from the beginning of the House. 3 of those happened this year. So you're seeing an uptick in this trend. I mean, I think it goes to see that this just goes to the partisanship and the polarization that we're seeing in Washington, but particularly on Capitol Hill, as we see lawmakers engage in these bitter battles that sometimes become more, have a personal tinge to them. Lawmakers are sort of upping how they respond, and they're going to things like expulsion. They're going to things like censure. I also think that lawmakers are recognizing these procedural tools they have on their hands, the ability to force a vote on censuring an individual or expelling an individual. That's what we saw with Bowman. That's what we saw with George Santos. These lawmakers using what's called a privileged resolution to force leadership to have to act on this measure. It's sort of empowering these single lawmakers even more, for better or worse. That's for others to decide. But we're definitely seeing them recognize these powers more and therefore use them more often.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned in response to my first question how Speaker Johnson has a very big job ahead of him through the end of this year and then through next year leading into the next election. What are the prospects of, obviously they fixed with the stopgap funding bill. Is this going to be a mess again when it comes to actually taking up budget and funding again? Are they going to put any of this to rest? Because it seems like since that happened, things only got more unraveled.
Yeah, I mean, this is Capitol Hill, so it's hard to predict what's going to happen because oftentimes things pretend to move right before the deadline. It's called, this Congress magic, this Senate and House magic. But I think you can always count on some chaos when you're talking about the House of Representatives, especially when you're talking about the appropriations process. I mean, look, the first 4 appropriations bills have a deadline on January 19th. This was part of Speaker Johnson's 2-part continuing resolution that was signed into law in November. The first tranche are due in January. Speaker Johnson has said he has no intention of putting another short-term spending bill on the floor, which means lawmakers have to get to work on those 4 bills. I'll tell you, though, some of those bills haven't even been able to pass the House because they've been so riddled in troubles between Republicans, Democrats, for one, are totally opposed to these bills because they were written at far lower levels than those spending levels that were set in the debt limit deal struck earlier this year. Democrats are out of the picture. And then you even have some Republicans who aren't on board for this for various measures. Abortion has become a real issue for some vulnerable Republicans, specifically those in Biden districts. Language has to do with abortion. So, I mean, look, will there be a shutdown? I think a partial shutdown because it's only those 4 bills. I think it's tough to tell right now because we're a little too far out and we could see some movement as that deadline approaches. But I'll tell you right now, the outlook doesn't look great. I mean, lawmakers can't agree in the House alone on these bills. bills. And then when you talk about the two chambers together, the Senate has marked up its spending bills at higher levels than the House. So there are a lot of problems there. Those deadlines, January 19th, February 2nd, for the rest of the 8 appropriations bills is coming up. Appropriations is definitely going to become the focus soon because all lawmakers, especially Johnson, have their work cut out for them.
Well, thankfully, we have you on the Hill covering the House for us. Mychael Schnell, thank you so much for joining us and explaining everything that is going on Capitol Hill. And yes, it is always interesting. We will be right back with more Rising right after this.